What's up, everybody? Welcome into another edition of SSPN. I'm Jude, that's Ethan, and today we're coming with a very special video for you guys, recapping the 2023 NBA draft for the Spurs, which obviously, Ethan, starts at the top with Victor
Yeah.
Wembanyama. But before we get into the players and talking about him and Sidy and how they've played together, we got the French duo. They talked about that a little bit at the press conference and the Meet the Rookies ceremony on the Riverwalk. The Coyote was on a jet ski. I mentioned that in the last video I made, the Trey Jones video I made recently. So y'all go check that out. But Ethan, just give me your overall thoughts on draft night before we jump into the individual stuff.
We are up, Jude. I mean, not only did we get the number one pick, and we can talk for hours about, Wemby
Right.
and what he means for the future, being the cornerstone, the franchise, as some people have been calling him. But
Oh, that's good.
you like that? I
Yeah.
thought you might. And then City, of course, at 44 overall, 44th pick. Excellent value pick, high upside, young, has the French connection. We can get into more details about him later. But I think he was a really, really solid selection. I think he could have a decent impact not only this year but long term as well. And then of course we traded the 33rd pick
Yep.
for a future second round pick, I believe, right?
2.
Two future second round picks. So we continue to stockpile. So the Spurs did kind of exactly what we thought they would
I
do,
know.
Jude. But we won't get
Really
into
what
that.
you've been harping on that the whole time, there's been a lot of craziness going around, and it makes sense because with Wembanyama, naturally everybody's going to get really excited. But
Mhm.
really, I think the lesson that we can learn from this draft, Ethan, is that the Spurs are going to Spurs even when they get the number one pick.
Yeah. Or also, lesson B, just listen to SSPN, baby. We will tell you. We won't lead you astray. We are the informed, logical news source for all Spurs basketball information.
That's the goal, especially in this new era with Wembanyama. And
Yep.
speaking of that, Ethan, when you touched on just talking about the overall takeaways from the draft, right? One of the things that Brian Wright said afterwards is he said he felt like Sidy Cissoko was somebody that they would have taken at 33 in the pick that they traded away to Minnesota, which ended up being his teammate, Leonard Miller. So the fact that they got him at 44, that was the
Mhm.
continued quote from Brian. He said, we were pretty happy about that. So
Mhm.
like I said, we talked about the French connection, but on top of that, when you're getting that value at the 44th pick and it's coming straight from Brian Wright, where he
Yeah.
said he would have picked him 11 picks earlier, you got to feel good about that. On top of getting the most generational prospect that we've seen since LeBron James, according to everybody in basketball, it feels like, Ethan. So let's jump into it. Victor Wembanyama on the Spurs. What are your thoughts on his fit? Obviously, the team is going to now be molded around him. We've had conversations about him playing the 4, and that's something that you and me would like to happen. But, we'll have to see how things play out. We'll have to see how Summer League plays out. And, it just got announced that he's not going to be playing in the FIBA World Cup this summer.
Yeah.
He's going to save, those legs, if you will, for Summer League and preparing for the Spurs. And also him taking that time off will allow for him to play in the Olympics next summer, which is really the main thing that he cares about. France will probably still qualify for that. Well, that'll be the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So the FIBA Cup doesn't even matter for the Olympics. So, anyways, I think there are some Olympic qualifiers, but France will definitely get in,
Yeah.
even if they didn't have him. That's what I was thinking. They might have to get in, but they'll have him regardless. Anyways, Ethan, Victor Wembanyama on the Spurs. The floor is yours.
Well, his talent speaks for itself, and we have exhausted. I feel like every every video we
Right.
talk about, his game, his being so versatile, so incredibly unique at 7'3" to be able to handle the ball the way he does, shoot the ball the way he does, defend the rim. What kind of impact will he have as far as his on the court play? I think it'll be, probably a little slow, or not slow, but underwhelming in terms of what the expectations are. But I still think he's
Absolutely.
going to get like 17 and 10. I don't think that that's at all
Yeah.
out of the question. It might even be higher. We'll have to see because
Yeah.
you really don't know with these foreign prospects how they're going to come in. It could be an Andre Bargnani situation or it could be a Luka Doncic situation.
Right.
Like
Right.
it's really a flip of the coin. But the thing that I've taken away the most, Jude, in these couple days after the draft is just off the court. His personality, his incredible wisdom at such a
Yeah.
young age. He
His
seems
demeanor.
demeanor. He seems on one side so incredibly grateful and emotional and happy to be in San Antonio and to be finally in the NBA and all those great things that go along with that. But at the same time, you kind of get the idea that this guy, he's got a different kind of confidence level about him.
Yeah.
The way he's speaking about his own game, his teammates, what he expects from himself, the kind of, he wants to be able to play as many games as possible his rookie year. He wants to win a ring as soon as possible. He loves the winning culture. He talked to the, Tim, Manu, David, and Sean. Like,
Yep.
there's all these little things. And then if you go to his likes on Twitter, he liked a thing where Rockets fans were teasing Spurs fans about how the Rockets are going to dominate the Spurs and
Yeah.
Wemby and, all this stuff. He liked that video. So it's all these little things. You're like, okay, this guy might have a bit of a competitive screw
Oh, he
loose.
does. He
And
does.
I'm extremely excited to see how that not only relates to the game, like actual game time, but then training camp and practices as well. How that correlates with his relationship with Sohan, who he already seems to have a good relationship with.
Yeah.
Jeremy and Keldon were both at his press conference.
Yeah.
All these little small things that I think are going to pay dividends at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to pick a point of what you covered there,
Yeah,
Ethan,
sorry,
because
I went big
because that
picture.
was a lot. No, don't feel bad at all. That was all great stuff. That kind of jumps into when it comes to the welcome ceremony and the press conference. And obviously, we mentioned this even on the live stream, I believe, when we were doing
Mhm.
it. On JJ Redick's podcast, you could tell that just the way that he speaks, the way that he describes things, the way that he describes his thinking patterns. Even, I mean, it was just like, that's why he joked on the episode. He's like, this dude has reached enlightenment, and,
Mhm.
and that's on top of all this other hype train that's been behind him. And that was the thing that I took away most from the welcome ceremony and the press conference. There's not too much that you can take away from that, other
Mhm.
than if they just say something, flat out, in the press
Yeah.
conference that's surprising. But the thing that stood out to me was just, once again, when you really got to see him, like in the Spurs press conference, in an NBA press conference, and now we know he's on the team. It's not just all this speculation, tanking for him and all that stuff. It really just kind of sunk in a little bit, like, okay, how different this dude is. And, I think that it'll continue to sink in more as we see how he handles losses, how he handles
Mhm.
adversity, as you mentioned. Um, yeah, there's really not much else to say with the other stuff that you covered, other than the fact that he's the most generational prospect that we've seen in a long time. It seems like, for his mold and his build, he's a perfect fit for the modern NBA, and also
Mhm.
a perfect fit for the Spurs organization as well.
I was curious, Jude, did you see the Dan Patrick interview yesterday with Sean Elliott?
I did not. What'd he
He
say?
interviewed Sean, and he asked Sean how that dinner went and what did Wemby actually ask them. And Sean spoke extremely highly of his personality, like we're saying, how incredibly um,
Well
what's the word?
spoken,
Well
all that
spoken,
stuff.
and yeah, et cetera, et cetera. But he said the biggest question that stood out to him was he was asking these guys on road trips for away games, how do you not stay tired? How do you keep your body and your mind rested? And Sean was like, "That's weird because most young guys are like, what kind of clubs are you going to in LA? Like, what are the
Yeah.
cool restaurants, the spots I got to go hit?" And he was like, "No, how do I make sure I don't overly exhaust myself?" And he's talking about literally getting sleep, napping, stuff like that. And I was like, "Wow, I would never have thought to ask that question if I was in his shoes."
I'm so glad you brought up that point, Ethan, because he had an interesting comment in his press conference. He said,
Oh,
I know I'm going to retire before I'm 40, which makes sense.
yeah,
It makes sense with all of the preparation that he puts into his body, and just with the reality of his frame. That doesn't mean he can't be incredible for 15 years.
yep,
That doesn't, and we'll have to see how it all plays out. That's the other thing. Obviously, the hype is all there. It seems like, when it comes to the hype, that's why the only comparison is LeBron James, because when it comes to the hype, it seems like he's the most sure thing to have this type of hype, even more than Zion, just
yeah,
because there's less weight, one. But then on top of that, it's also just all of the French league records, playing multiple years of pro basketball. The list goes on and on. And then on top of that, this French league playoff run, his final season, where he loses to the, Monaco, who's the powerhouse of the league. And they weren't even really expected to be in the finals. So there's so many, the list, all the records that he broke this season as well, the jump, the difference that you can see from him in the year prior when he was playing for Tony Parker's team to this year physically. He mentioned that in the press conference when Jeremy Sohan was there asking him questions before he was even drafted. And he said you can really see the difference in me physically when he was asking, how do you think your game has grown since we played in 2018? And yeah, man, I could go on and on. I lost a little bit of my train of
No,
thought
you're
there.
fine. You're fine. Yeah, I mean, you pretty much covered it. I don't really have anything else to add.
On Wemby. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, Ethan, because I made some notes for the show, and I've got this whole list of bullet points for Sidy Cissoko, who we're about to get into, and then for Wembanyama, I just wrote down Wemby is Wemby because he's unlike any other prospect we've seen. His
Mm-hmm.
skill set is unlike any other player we've seen. Because of just his uniqueness overall, and it kind of fits that it's almost like his personality with him being unlike the other younger players. The point that you were bringing up, that kind of matches his play style as well. And he even said I'm remembering some stuff now, Ethan, in the G League Ignite press conference, he said, they asked him, who do you compare your game to? And he said, well, I want to be myself. I want to be Victor, or I want to be Wemby. Victor. He might have said Wemby, or he might have said his full name. It doesn't really matter. But then he went on to say like Giannis and KD were some of the other guys that he was taking after right now that he liked. But he put an emphasis on him wanting to be himself.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and you brought up KD there. Another thing that Dan Patrick was talking about with Sean is like the whole how everyone's talking about how Wemby needs to put on weight and muscle and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then Dan Patrick was like, how much weight has Kevin Durant really put on since he got into the league? And he's like, he's been in the league since 2007. He goes,
Right.
he might have put on 20 pounds of muscle. And he goes, really,
Mm-hmm.
all it was is muscle tone. Like, he's still extremely skinny. He's just muscular rather
He's
than.
had his injuries. He's had his
Yeah,
major injuries,
he has. And he's still dominant
Right.
as far as offensively. I think Wemby
Right.
has a higher upside defensively. But
He's a Hall of Famer.
yeah,
No doubt.
he was just saying skill set and being a unique player like Wemby will trump putting on all this muscle. Because who's going to bully him really? Like, anymore, you don't get bullied.
Yeah. Yeah. And he even said that in the Good Morning America interview where he said, actually, I'd say guys need to skinny up.
Yep.
And, when we mentioned that, when I read that the first time, I wasn't sure if that was real. And then I saw it. But when I saw it in full context, it made a little bit more sense. He was just saying people like him,
Mhm.
if you put on all this weight, one, it can put a lot of stress on your joints. But also in the modern era of basketball, you want to be able to be more quick and agile and mobile and versatile so that you can switch on a lot of these cuts. And, it's funny. I watched a little bit of his highlights as well as CD's before we got on here. And, obviously this is stuff I've seen before, but just another little thing that I was reminded of watching him was his lateral quickness as
Mhm.
someone at his size. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
that's
incredible.
just not something that we've really seen before. And I know you can say that with a lot of stuff about Wembanyama, but that aspect of it, I was like, that's where I was just like, man, this build is just like, it's like he was born into this era at the right time.
Mhm.
It's why Nike's marketing him as a supernova. But I digress, Ethan. Let's talk about the other Frenchman that the Spurs took and got at number 44 that, like I said, Brian Wright felt like they would have taken at 33. This is actually a name that I've thrown around a lot, when we've been talking about the draft. So I'm happy that I was somebody I was a little bit familiar with and somebody I would like to get as well going into the draft in the second round. And honestly, to get him at 44, it feels like a steal to me, Ethan, after going over his highlight tape. But I think really it's more of a test. It's less of a steal and more of a testament to the depth of this draft. But tell me your thoughts on Sidy Cissoko, and then I'll give you mine as a player.
Sure. I mean, obviously, you're way higher on him, so you're going to have a lot more detail. But just kind of big picture thoughts on City. Obviously, a steal at 44. You're 100% correct. I felt like he was a lot better than probably a good majority of the other second round picks that were picked prior to him. Just personally, I feel like he's got a perfect build for the modern NBA to play the four or the three. He kind of reminds me of a slightly shorter and obviously a lot less polished when he came into the NBA, but Scotty Barnes, kind of a really solid muscular build,
Interesting. I like
solid
that.
defender. He obviously had a problem with fouling out in the G League Ignite. I think he fouled out in most of his games, so that's obviously going to be something he has to work on. But I still like the aggressiveness. He's a bulldog, and he's already got a grown man's body at 19
Yeah.
years old. So this is his floor. I don't. He's only going to get better from here. And
Yeah.
shooting, I'm not worried about that at all. That's something the Spurs have been able to fix from day one. So
Uh-huh.
get him in the gym, get him with the coaching staff. He's going to be a 3-and-D guy a lot sooner than I think a lot of us are expecting him to be. And I still think he has more to his game than just that. But I think that'll be the first thing to kind of come through once he actually gets with the Spurs staff. And for me, long term, I think he's
Yeah.
a really solid backup four. Um, and he could be more, but for me at this point, that's where his ceiling is.
Yeah, yeah. Just to give a little bit of context for that, and he does have the size to do that. That's why
Mhm.
even in the welcome ceremony, you saw Sean talking, kind of comparing him to Boris a little bit.
A little
And
bit.
that was the first time it popped into my mind. I was like, man, with the size that like I'm seeing from him right now, because he looked
Mhm.
much bigger than expected as well, just seeing him in person. And that comment, I was like, hmm. And then also there was somebody in the press conference talked about him playing 1 through 4. But the interesting thing is, he hasn't played the 4 really in his career. He's played the 3 and the 2 mainly, but that's because of his playmaking, Ethan, which
Mhm.
once again ties into the Boris
Boris.
comparison.
Mhm.
And that's the thing. I mean, I can talk a little bit about his offensive highlights as well, because I think when people go turn on the tape just from his full season, if they watch, all of those highlights, the no ceilings finals where they do offense, playmaking, and defense, you're going to see a bunch of dunks. You're going to see a bunch of, pump fakes off the dribble, driving. I mean, a lot of highlight stuff, Ethan. While it
Mhm.
was only 12 points per game, like they were allowed 12 points, if you will, at least just from the tape that I've seen there. Um, but on top of that, like I said, also his playmaking. That was kind of why he played more of the 2, despite having the size that he does. And also, they had Leonard Miller on that team. They had Eric Mika, so they had guys that were more for that role, which is why it's exciting. That he has that size to potentially have that versatility. But really, kind of when I just think of him on the roster, Ethan, I think as of right now, he just slides into that backup 2 spot. Maybe he ends up playing the 4 if they move Champagny to the 2. But also that's the other thing with the Sidy Cissoko pick. I'm kind of getting a little bit off topic of when it comes to just his skill set, but I think he's somebody who could be around for a little bit, as you alluded to. I think he's got a really high upside. He's similar to Jeremy Sohan in the sense that he can do like he has potential everywhere. And
Yeah.
he's a better shooter than Jeremy coming in. Now, that's not me saying that he's going to be as good as Jeremy. I'm just saying that he's got a lot of playmaking skills. He's a solid defender who can switch. I was watching his highlights before we got on. He can take people off the dribble, like I said, because he can play make. There's tons of behind, like not behind the. Well, he does have some behind the back passes, but there's so many where he's like driving to the rim, and it's just like Boris, where he like puts his arm around a defender and dumps it to
Wrap
a
around.
drive. Yes, wrap around. Perfect. That's what I was looking for, right? And
Mhm.
dumps it to a defender like coming in, on a cut. But that's the other thing about CD is, dude, like they run a bunch of motion where
Mhm.
it's like somebody setting a screen for him on a cut. And there were so many of those plays. Oh, he likes CD. See, he knows. He's telling you, Ethan, he's seen these off-ball cuts from CD Cissoko. And
Mhm.
that's the thing that excites me about his game is that there's playmaking. He's able to catch and shoot, but he's also able to move. They ran a lot of motion on that offense with Scoot Henderson, and he was somebody who on those cuts that Scoot would dish it to a lot of the times. And he can finish in contact because of his frame. I
Mhm.
know it sounds like I'm talking about so much stuff is good. There's obviously still like some work that he has to do, but a kid who has played 3 straight professional seasons and is 19 coming into the league at 44 in the draft is something you got to feel good about. He's played, he knows how to play off top tier talent playing with Scoot Henderson. Similar to Sandro Mamukelashvili, he's got those 2 years in Spain, which gets you the European side of the game on top of playing with Wembanyama for the French national team as well. So there's chemistry of them just competing against each other growing up on top of the chemistry from them being on the same team. Um, and I'm losing my train of thought again, Ethan.
Right, he's got chemistry with other guys. He came in with experience. He think he.
Yes. Getting back, that was the main thing, the pro aspect of it. So
Mhm.
I was talking about Mamu. He's got the European game with the French team and as well playing in Spain. And then on top of that, he's got the American game meshed together whenever it comes to the G League Ignite experience this past season, which is just once again, like I said with Mamu, that's kind of the Spurs game. It really is the mesh of the American game and the European game. And
Yeah.
that's something that CD even mentioned in his press conference. He was like, the Spurs are the team in the NBA that are the most like Europe. Right. And so this is just, I mean, not only is there the French connection, but it's just like, it was just the perfect Spurs draft. And it was also the most, it was like the Spurs almost got back to their roots. Like,
Yeah.
obviously you need guys like Keldon and Devin and, the chances that we took on, you could say, I'm about to say Quindary and Wieskamp. That's not necessarily what I mean. Probably Derek and DeJounte would be better examples. Obviously, I had to move on from those guys, but like, you want to try to get those, dogs that, come up in the EYBL circuit, like a Devin Vassell and a Keldon Johnson who played at Oak Hill, and,
Mhm.
blue blood programs in Florida State and Kentucky. But when you can mesh, those type of guys with, like that's basically what the Spurs did for their 5 championships with Manu, Tony, and Tim. It was,
Mhm.
a bunch of other role players, but a lot of dogs. Avery Johnson, Robert Ory, Rodman was earlier, but still, that was kind of. Well, I don't know if that was really before they got into the
Yeah, that was
Europeans,
way
but
before
that
Tim.
was way before. That's a bad example, but I know
Steven Jackson.
Bruce Bowen, right? Well,
Steven Jackson. Speedy Claxton.
I say
Malik Rose.
yes, exactly. I said Bruce Bowen. I call him a dog, and the only thing that I can just see is just his foot going into that dude's face,
Yeah,
and I'm just like, was he? He was a dog, but like
a dirty dog.
that was over the top. Anyways, this you had to get all those type of guys right, but
Mhm.
um you can just see the parallels with this. It was cool to see just like the perfect foreign connection for both players. But then the other thing I have to say about CD before I give it back to you, Ethan, is
Mhm.
at the press conference, like I said, my man played 2 years in Spain. At the press conference, he's speaking his English. It's not obviously he's lived here for a year. You can tell he's still working on it a little bit, but still overall solid, right? Not the worst English I've ever heard. But dude, when he went to Spanish, that thing it started coming out,
Yep.
man, and the crowd started going crazy. And I was like, CD's gonna be just fine in San Antonio.
Oh yeah,
He ain't gonna have no problems, man. He can speak fluent Spanish. He's just gonna be loved.
a
But
crowd favorite for sure.
Yep. And another thing that Wembanyama said about him also, because they had to ask about that because they've been teammates, is he said he's ultra competitive. And he told a story like that he remembered when they played each other when they were like 8 or 9. CD even talked about it in his press conference. So it's just they've known each other for a really long time. So that chemistry won't be hard, and that's not something the Spurs struggle with anyway.
No, not at all. And that explains why he fouls out so much if he is extremely competitive. Because when you're extremely competitive, what do? You
And
overreact.
also that could have been an adjustment to the U.S. rules
For
as
sure. It's
well.
just a different physicality. Um, but yeah, I'm looking forward to see what he's able to do in the summer league because obviously he will play. I'm pretty sure Wemby will play at least the first couple games.
Hmm.
And I don't know if these rumors are true, but I've heard that Sohan, Wesley, and Malachi will also be playing
I've
to
been
kind of
seeing that
give
as
them some
well.
continuity. So that would really be your starting lineup: Blake,
Yeah.
Malachi, Sidy, Jeremy, and then Wemby at the 5, I guess. Uh,
Yep.
so that's a solid lineup. I'm looking forward to seeing that. July 7th is their first game, right?
It will definitely be. All eyes will be on the
Mm-hmm.
Spurs for the first time in a long time, Ethan.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Finally, we've been waiting
Right.
so long.
But just another thing about CD before we end off, just talking about where he fits onto this team, not necessarily positionally. I know we talked about how there's probably no point to do that anyway because he can play 1 through 4 basically. Um, but dang it, I'm losing my train of thought again, Ethan. I was just about to ask you a question.
That's all right. You talking about his
Oh,
position?
duh. Well, just how he fits on the roster. Where do you? Thank you. You reminded me. Where do you think? What do you think his season is going to be like? Like, for example, basically, I think he'll probably end up in Austin for most of the season. Maybe he'll have some call up games. I'm interested to see what his contract is going to be. I haven't seen the news on that. Maybe we're just uninformed. If somebody knows, hit it up in the comments. But if he gets a full on contract, I think regardless, that's the point, because we've given out some two ways to Wieskamp and Quindary Weatherspoon in the past. I think obviously the Spurs are higher on Sidy, and I think you and I would be as well. So I think I would say I think he's going to get an actual contract on the team. But I think regardless of that, he'll be in Austin for most of the year this season.
He'll absolutely be in Austin for most of the season, barring any major injuries. I think he'll be kind of the third string 2, 3, and 4. And
Yeah.
he'll like come in if somebody gets hurt or somebody gets traded or something. He might get some
Mm-hmm.
spot minutes here or there, but I would agree with you wholeheartedly, Jude.
But you know what? That'll make it easier for us, Ethan, because he
Mm,
played in the G League last year. It'll be super easy to track his development
for sure.
this season, and where he's improved, because we'll actually have that tape. So shout out to Be Right, trading the picks away, getting 2 extras, and still getting the guy you wanted at 33. But Ethan, there were some other people that the Spurs signed that we're not going to do giant breakdowns on, because to be honest, I don't know that much about them.
Hmm.
And that is a two-way contract was handed out to Serge Abari Rice, guard from Texas. I watched him in March Madness, and I watched him a couple other times this season. My girlfriend went to UT and is a big UT fan, so I've gone to some games. And he's a sniper. He's an older guy, he's a veteran, but a really solid 3-and-D guy. I think he'll be in Austin mainly, and that'll be great for the Austin Spurs to bring out some more fans as well with that Austin connection. But I just think he's a solid two-way pickup. I think he could be very similar to Champagny, honestly.
It's probably a very fair comparison. Surprisingly skilled guy. I've seen all of his pump fake highlights. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
hilarious. But yeah, I mean, you pretty much hit it nail on the head. But my buddy David, who goes to UT, claims that he's much better than anyone's giving him credit for. So maybe he's a diamond in the rough. I don't know. He also could just be
You
looking through
know,
orange colored glasses.
Another comparison that I was thinking of, Ethan, when it came to Serge Ibaka, is Jonathan Simmons. That's another one that I
Oh,
could see. And that's somebody who could find their way onto the team. Look at
yeah.
2017 Jonathan Simmons. I'm not saying Serge Ibaka's career is going to go like that, even though that's really not that bad, because that would just end with a giant bag from Orlando. But
Mhm.
that's besides the point. I think that just his mix of athleticism and shooting ability, and intensity is reminiscent of Jonathan Simmons a little bit. Good two-way pickup. And then also the Spurs picked up Alabama's center from this season. You can tell that I know a lot about him because I don't even know his name.
I didn't even know we had him, to be
but
honest.
and I'm pretty sure it's just a summer league and training camp contract. It was described on Twitter. I can't remember if it was Shams or Woj, but it was like a legit one. That it was just a 1-year deal. But I was talking to one of my friends who's he actually covers basketball and he's a Spurs fan. And he was saying that it's probably just going to be training camp and summer league. So there was another guy that we signed as well on an Exhibit 10, which that's basically what it means, is it's training camp and summer league.
I'm going to say what I'm about to say, Jude, just in case one of these guys becomes like a Jokic type down the
Okay.
road. They're probably not going to play. I'm just going to leave it at that. I want someone to clip that in 10 years and they're winning MVPs.
When Serge Abari Rice is
Yeah,
like our 6th man. And it's
they're not
like
going to play. Put me in an HEB commercial.
I love it. I love it. Well, Ethan, just to wrap up here, this may not be, you may not have like the most in-depth answer here, but how do these selections affect the roster moving forward?
Well, Wemby completely alters the timeline, so
Right.
that one pushes things up just a little bit, and he's
Uh-huh.
obviously going to be the cornerstone. CD, I think we found ourselves a long-term piece. I'm going to say role player for now. Hopefully, knock on wood, he can maybe be something more than that. But I think saying that he's going to be a very, very solid role player, reminiscent of Boris Diaw on those championship teams, I think that's a really solid prediction for him and something that I would hope he could aspire to. The other guys, solid pieces, competitive dudes. Let's see what happens. The Spurs are notorious for
Right.
finding these two-way guys that end up being pretty solid role players in their own right. So good luck to them as well.
Yeah, I think it just makes more competition
That's true.
With depending on, like I said, the conversation about what kind of contract CD gets, that's one less contract for somebody else. That makes
Hmm.
Julian Champagny, not saying he can't get a spot, but it's going to be a lot tougher. And
Yeah.
that's a good thing for the Spurs. And maybe you can still end up having him on a two-way because of the CBA, or just because of the nature of drafting Sidy Cissoko. So you'd want to put him because he's the better player. But at the end of the day, it's good because it's more talent. But we might have a little bit of heartbreak because of it. And I mean, it's not like giant heartbreak like some of the main guys on the roster, but still some of these guys that we've come to like a lot. Like we just drafted somebody at Champagny and Mamu's position. Now I think Mamu's going to make it, but like some of those other guys, it's just things get a little bit dicier. But another thing that I want to talk about actually before we end, though, Ethan, Charles Bassey and Blake Wesley recently, they were at an event to open up a park, and a court in San Antonio that was all Spurs themed. And obviously both of them are under contract, but I've been seeing Blake more a little bit, even in like some graphics that we've been making. Um, you know, what do you think about like? I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with this. I think Blake might be making a jump. That's kind of the other thing that I was saying because of the Trey Jones news. But also I think while some guys are in limbo, like I said with Champagny because of this draft, and it just might be a little bit harder for them to make the roster. Their road won't be as clear as it used to be. I think that some of these guys that we might be underestimating, like the two guys I just mentioned who are going out to community events, and the Spurs are sending them out there because they want them to be, in the community because they're a part of the Spurs. They don't do that with just everybody. Obviously, they did that with Trey a little bit, but then they made the announcement, right? With these two guys being under contract, I think they might be a little bit further ahead than we're giving them credit for. Obviously, Charles had the injury. Blake had a lot of struggles, but we know the potential upside there. What are your kind of thoughts on those two guys and maybe some guys that we're, been down on a little bit this season, making some jumps? Because Pop also said in the post-draft press conference, the first thing he said was our guys, and he wanted to emphasize it, have had a great summer. I know we were about to end there, Ethan, but I just remembered this, and I think
Yeah.
this is a big conversation, just when it comes to the roster. Because there's been a lot of people talking about trading people, and just making all these win now moves, but it seems like everything coming from the Spurs is that they really like their guys.
Hmm. Well, I would think holistically everyone's going to have a pretty big jump this season because finally, knock on wood, everybody's healthy. And as far as I'm concerned, the whole project tank for whoever's going to be the number one pick next year is not in effect. We have our guy. So there's no reason necessarily to try and lose. So
Yeah.
everyone has a full off season. Everyone pretty much knows where they're going to be on the rotation, I would feel like. So in short, yeah, I would expect Blake Wesley to have a pretty significant jump. He's going to be the backup point guard in my eyes. I don't think we're going to go out and sign anybody other than maybe Trey Jones on whatever offer he gets. Just match it.
Mm-hmm.
So the expectation will be higher. He will not be given as long of a leash. So I would hope that he's been working on his game, watching some films, and trying to minimize the mistakes that he's made because he has the talent and he's shown
Yeah.
that he's capable of being a very very talented player. It's just those small mistakes, being too loose with his ball, throwing the ball away,
Yep.
ill-advised passes, bad rotations, those little things that pile up, pile up, pile up until now all of a sudden people are saying that he's a bust or
Right.
Pop's pulling him too quick. So I would hope he's kind of corrected some of those things, and this season we can get a true full sample size on what he can do in the NBA. And the same goes for everybody, I think, across the board. Devin will probably have a career year. I would think Keldon would probably stay around the same where he is, just being that we have Wemby coming into. He's
Right.
going to get some more touches. Um, but yeah, that's my answer.
I know that was a long-winded way of saying that. I was kind of trying to think of how to describe what I was thinking there, but I think you got it there. So
Thank you.
appreciate you encapsulating that, Ethan. Anyways, thank you all for hanging out with us. Tell us your thoughts on the draft below. Tell us what you think about Victor Wembanyama and Sidy Cissoko. becoming San Antonio Spurs. And also tell us your favorite Coyote moments from the Riverwalk. Mine was him on the jet ski. I know I mentioned it again, but I had to mention it once more because it was so great. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to hit that like button and the subscribe button below. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter as well, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch you all in the next one. Go Spurs, go.